It's 7:30, so before we call the meeting to order, we'd like to have Commission elect an acting chair, and staff would nominate Danny Otto. I guess all in favor? Opposed? Okay.
Okay, now that we're doing this correctly. So I call this meeting of the Urbana Plan Commission to order and ask that the roll be called.
Mr. Buttrey? Ms. Bindum? Mr. Fell? Mr. Fitch? Mr. Hopkins? Mr. Nagel? Mr. Otto?
Here.
Mr. Storr? And Mr. Trail? That's it.
Okay, we have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, sir. We would ask that we proceed with new public hearings prior to old business.
Okay. Without objection, we'll reverse the orders of item 7 and item 6. Next item is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Any comments, questions, corrections?
We did not have those for you.
So we will get those next session.
Yes, sir.
So we will skip approval of the minutes and go on to communications.
Yes, we have two communications for you. The first is the Plan Commission annual schedule for 2015. Plan Commission meets on the Thursday following the first and third Monday of the month. Usually it's following City Council. I think there was one date, December 24th is a scheduled meeting, but I think that will be canceled or rescheduled. And our other written communication was an updated text for the text amendment case that we'll be hearing, and I'll explain that when we get to that case.
Okay. Continued public hearings, we have none. Is that correct?
Right.
So now we go to the new public hearing, plan case number 2242-T-14, a request by the Urbana Zoning Administrator to amend Articles 9 and 11 of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance to establish regulations for digital outdoor advertising sign structures.
This is a request by the zoning administrator to establish standards for digital outdoor advertising sign structures or digital billboards. As I mentioned before, we have a slight change to the text which was handed out. I'll be going through all the text during my presentation, but it was updated to take into account comments from the petitioner, or not from the petitioner, but from Adams Outdoor Advertising. So it's a request to allow digital billboards in a manner that's safe and consistent with our existing zoning ordinance restrictions on signage. It's a response to a request by Adams Outdoor Advertising. They've been asking for us to enact standards for digital billboards for quite some time now. So we've recently were able to finally wrap up our research and have a proposed ordinance for a plan commission. Throughout the presentation, I might use the term digital billboards instead of digital OASS. The zoning ordinance refers to digital I'm sorry, refers to outdoor advertising sign structures. But in layman's terms, it's just a billboard. So tonight we'll be talking about the trend in the industry moving towards digital billboards, costs and revenues of digital billboards compared to other traditional billboards, some issues with safety, traffic safety mostly, issues with aesthetics. Then we'll take a look at the city's existing regulations for OASS. Take a look at the inventory of our existing OASS in the city. Then we'll go through the proposed ordinance to allow digital billboards. So as I mentioned before, our zoning ordinance, Article 9, addresses signage and OASS. It treats them separately. Traditional signage is usually on-premise signage for a business, like the Golden Arches would be a traditional sign, just a sign that announces a business on a property. Outdoor advertising sign structures are what the ordinance calls, or what we refer to when we talk about billboards. OASS generally refers to off-premise advertising. Usually it's a large 300 square foot sign advertising a business or a service, or a public announcement that usually does not have anything to do with the property that it's located on. Currently, our ordinance prohibits digital OASS. The proposed ordinance change would add a definition for digital OASS. It would add regulations to Article or Section 9-6, and it would also add an enforcement mechanism for some of the provisions into Article 11, which is where our administration and fines are in the zoning ordinance. Okay, so recently, I guess over the past decade or so, digital billboards have become more and more popular. Our latest, or one of the articles we researched said they were up to 3.5% of existing billboards in the country. Digital billboards allow several advantages over traditional or static billboards, including having multiple ad images on one display. Normally it's up to 8, but normally, or on average, I guess, other cities allow those images to display at a rate of 1 every 8 or 10 seconds. And usually they have up to 8 ads in their rotation. Digital billboards offer a higher rate of retention for advertising. They offer increased revenue. I'd like to make a couple corrections to my report.
Excuse me, could you just, what does retention mean in this context?
Of people signing up to have billboards a second and third time instead of just doing it once and then not doing it again.
Thank you.
So in my report, we had we had some old numbers for revenues. After talking to Adams Outdoor Advertising about the local markets, revenues for their digital billboards appear to be about $1,800 per month. But nationally, digital billboards average a cost of, or a rate of $500 more per month than static billboards of the same size. And of course, with the increased number of ads, they have an increased revenue. Instead of having just one ad per month or per 4 weeks, they have several more ads. Additional bonuses from digital billboards, they can be hooked into Metcad systems and provide emergency alerts, things like Amber Alerts, weather alerts, evacuations, other emergency messages. Some downsides to digital billboards: they are more costly to install. Traditional billboards are in the low tens of thousands. Adams estimates that a new digital billboard for our market costs about $180,000 all told. And additionally, there are some concerns about safety, traffic safety, and aesthetics. So let's dive into some of those concerns. Driver distraction. When we were starting to work on this ordinance amendment, we did a lot of research. We started off with an American Planning Association zoning practice bulletin that's been attached to your memo. That bulletin referenced several safety studies, and we also researched several other safety studies. One thing we found in our research was it was hard to find a truly neutral study. Many of them seem to be funded by one side or the other, the Outdoor Advertising Association or Scenic America. It's a lobby group against billboards. But we were able to find some good studies that seemed pretty neutral. Some were from abroad, University of Toronto, the Swedish National Road and Transport Institute. Local ones are domestic studies from the Federal Highway Administration. We also have been involved in a Illinois Department of Transportation safety study that's focused on the University Avenue corridor. And although that study doesn't strictly target billboards, it does have some interesting concerns about safety that we've incorporated into the proposed ordinance. And there's been other studies and legal case reviews. We had our former planning manager, Robert Myers, is somewhat of an expert on signage and billboards. And we had him in conjunction with Danielle Mandelker, a professor down in St. Louis. We had them review our proposed ordinance just to see if they caught any red flags. And their report is also attached to our memo that we handed out. So in terms of the findings from safety studies, they were kind of mixed, but most of them seem to conclude that drivers may glance at digital billboards for longer periods than they glance at static billboards. And they also glance at digital signs more often than static signs. That makes sense if a sign's changing every 8 to 10 seconds, especially. When you notice a change, you'll probably your eye will be drawn towards it. Billboards or digital billboards that are in the direct line of sight of a driver are the most distracting. Or actually, they're more distracting. The most distracting signs are animated signs, signs with video, signs with scrolling text, those types of things. So in our recommendation, we recommend flat out prohibition on video, animation, transitions, anything that's got motion. The IDOT study that I mentioned, it's not yet at draft stage, but in our talks with them, one of the key things they mentioned is visibility of traffic signals. So that's something we hope to address in our proposed text amendment. One other safety issue is clusters of billboards. You'd imagine if if you look up at one billboard and spend a certain amount of time looking at it, if you add a second or third billboard, you're just going to multiply that amount of time you spend not looking at the road. You would spend that time looking at billboards instead. In the safety studies, they mostly recommend, well, they all recommend minimizing the amount of time looking away from the road. But the general consensus is that anything 2 seconds or longer is an unsafe amount of time to not be looking at the road. Aesthetic concerns. These are our second major area of concern. Billboards, by their nature, are there to draw people's attention. The idea is to sell advertising space, and the way you can increase your revenue is by drawing attention of more and more people. So they put them up on the busiest corridors they can and spread them out so different areas of the city can view them. But the main purpose of a billboard is to draw people's attention. They use bright colors and striking graphics to do this. So billboards in general are not appropriate for most areas of the city. Definitely not for residential areas, and not for areas where we want to increase the quality of character. For example, downtown Urbana. So billboards in general are limited to certain commercial corridors throughout the city. The issue there is these commercial corridors already contain on-premise signs for several businesses. So adding billboards can create a cluttered appearance to those corridors. Kind of a Las Vegas style cluttered appearance in the worst case. And when you create groups or clusters of billboards, that just adds to the clutter, which is not something that we like for the character of the city. So those are some of the aesthetic concerns, really. And here's a couple of examples of clustered billboards. This top photo is of Philo Road between Florida Avenue and Washington. It's just an area that's got 3 billboards in a row. The bottom photo, these are all Google Street View images, since the weather wasn't very conducive to vibrant photos. The bottom photo is of University Avenue looking east, heading towards the intersection at Lincoln Avenue. So you can see there's a property on the close side of Lincoln that has 4 separate billboards. And the middle set you can't really see, but the middle set is they face both south and north. And then on the far side of Lincoln, there's an additional 2 billboards on a Carle Hospital property. Okay. So let's get into the city's current regulations on billboards. They're found in section 9-6 of the zoning ordinance. Billboards are limited to those certain commercial corridors, as I mentioned, basically within 660 feet of I-74, University Avenue, Cunningham Avenue, US 150, and Lincoln Avenue, but only north of Bradley Avenue. Billboards are only allowed on private property, not in the public right-of-way. They're only allowed in the in 4 zoning districts: the B3 general commercial, the B4E, it's central business extended district, IN1 light industrial and office, and IN2 heavy industrial districts. Billboards cannot be within 300 feet of a single-family and two-family zoning districts or conservation, recreation, education districts. Billboards cannot be within 300 feet of a historic landmark or district. And billboards must be at least 1,000 feet from other existing billboards, but they may be back-to-back. Billboards are prohibited from TIF projects, tax increment financing, city-funded projects. And the limits for billboards are 35 feet in the commercial districts and 40 feet in the industrial districts. And the area limit for new billboards is 300 square feet, but they're allowed a little room, extra room, if they have an irregular shape. So here's a photo or a map of where billboards are allowed per the ordinance. You can see it's mostly along University Avenue, Cunningham Avenue. There's a lot of industrial property up north along Interstate 74 and Lincoln Avenue. It's kind of low traffic areas. Other than that, they're not really allowed anywhere south of 660 feet south of University Avenue. And there's a couple areas near downtown which are zoned B4E, and a couple little parcels that are zoned industrial, IN1, I believe.
What about the South Philo Road? You showed us some there. Are those grandfathered in? They couldn't be rebuilt, or?
Yes, that is correct. And actually, I was just about to get to those.
Oh.
So our city's current inventory, there are 37 billboard structures within the city with 72 separate faces. So a lot of billboards are back-to-back. There's one face showing one way, another face showing the other. Some billboards have 4 faces, 2 one way, 2 the other. The vast majority of those billboard faces are 300 square feet in area, either 10 by 30 or 12 by 25. There's one billboard in the city that has a larger face, 451 square feet. That one is located, if you're traveling south along Cunningham, when you run into University Avenue, you'll see it right there, just south of University Avenue. And there's another one that's only 240 square feet. So of these 37 billboard structures, 14 of them meet most of the zoning criteria in terms of they're in the appropriate location and appropriate district. So that means the majority of them are not in the appropriate location or district. 3 of them are fully compliant with our zoning ordinance, which means they meet the zoning criteria, zoning district, location, and they're not within 1,000 feet of another billboard. So we have 34 legally non-conforming billboard structures in the city. And those may not be expanded or rebuilt, or their life may not be prolonged. They may not be altered per Article 10 of the zoning ordinance, which deals with nonconformities. Oh, one other current regulation I forgot to mention was that the structures, the bases need to be architecturally cladded or screened with some kind of vegetation where possible. Okay, so here is a look at the current inventory. The orange dots represent the billboard structures. The black numbers represent the number of faces on each of those structures. And there's a lighter yellow buffer around each structure, which represents a 1,000-foot buffer. So you'll notice that most of the billboards are within 1,000 feet of another billboard throughout the city. And downtown, we have several billboards, which are, forgot to explain, the blue again is the spaces, the physical spaces where they would be allowed. So the right zoning district and not within any of the prohibited buffers, buffers of residential landmarks, etc. So the blue is in the background. It's kind of obscured by the yellow 1,000-foot buffer. But you can see pretty much everything in downtown is either in a location that's not allowed or within 1,000 feet of another billboard. And as you mentioned, there's a cluster of 3 down on Philo Road. And I guess that's really all I need to show here. So here are some photos of billboards. On the left is the largest one in the city at Cunningham and University, just above the former Blockbuster space. On the right is one of the downtown billboards located in a B4 district. It's a regular 300 square foot billboard. Here is another downtown billboard. It's one of the structures that have 2 faces facing each direction. On the left here is a billboard on Cunningham Avenue, and just wanted to point out some of the architectural cladding. On the right is an older billboard structure along, I believe, University Avenue. And I think that one on the right is one of the 3 structures that fully conforms with zoning. Okay. So, moving on to our proposed regulations, we did research of other cities to see how they regulate digital billboards. Digital billboards are allowed in many cities throughout the country in the Midwest and Illinois. Illinois cities include Bloomington, Carbondale, Champaign, Danville, Decatur, Edwardsville, Normal, Peoria, and Springfield. Those are just the ones we surveyed. We usually look at peer communities that are downstate when we're formulating our zoning ordinance amendments. And billboard regulations for digital billboards in other cities look at all kinds of different aspects: location, zoning districts, buffers from residential uses and historic properties, buffers from other billboards, buffers from other digital billboards, light levels of billboards, frequency of how often they may change, if they're allowed to have any animation or scrolling text, requirements to remove other billboards prior to installing new digital billboards. That's a common theme we saw. We'll discuss that in a minute. Emergency message overrides, and what happens when a billboard malfunctions. Okay, so our proposed ordinance amendment for digital billboards is as follows. First, we would add a section to add a definition for digital billboards to section 9-2. it would define them as an OASS with an electronic display capable of displaying changeable copy, controlled by programming or electronic communications. And that's kind of a standard definition that we found in several ordinances. Some of these next criteria are going to be in section 9-6. First of all, a new billboard or a billboard replacing the face of an old static billboard is going to require a new OASS permit. So in order to get that permit, they'd have to meet all the zoning ordinance criteria under 9-6 D and C, which we'll discuss here, or actually which we already just discussed. The location, the buffer from other billboards, buffer from historic areas, buffer from residents, height limits, and area limits. Area would be limited to 300 square feet. Existing non-conforming locations cannot be changed to another non-conforming sign, expanded or relocated per section 10-9 of our zoning ordinance. Just a note. And one other proposed amendment would add fines to Article 11. That's where we have our zoning ordinance fines for things like parking on the grass or putting up a temporary sign. So we're proposing to add a fine for both electronic message boards on regular signs and a fine for digital OASS that violates our frequency or hold time or animation stipulations. Okay, there's a review of the current regulations that new digital billboards would have to abide by. Okay, so in terms of hold time is the amount of time an ad must be displayed before the next ad pops up. In our survey of other cities, we have a table that we passed out in our memo with a survey of about 20 other cities. You can see the various hold times that they have. They average about 8 to 10, I'm sorry. Most of them are 8 to 10 seconds. They average a little bit more than that because there are some outliers. One city has, I think, 6 minutes of hold time. Another city has a 20-minute hold time. Again, faster times have the potential to be more distracting to drivers. And staff is suggesting a 3-minute hold time in this ordinance for 2 reasons. One, for safety. Again, if they're changing every 8 to 10 seconds, people driving by are going to be more likely to be distracted. And the other reason is consistency with our existing ordinance requirements, which for electronic message boards. So this is just to be consistent on all electronic media across the city. It would make for easier enforcement, and it would it was also something that was recommended by Robert Myers and Professor Mendelker in their review. And again, animation, video transitions, and scrolling text would be prohibited. Safety provisions, line of sight.
Did you intend to skip that one? This one?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, good catch. Thank you. Slip of the finger. Illumination. So again, looking at this table, different cities regulate illumination of digital billboards in several different methods. Some measure them in nits, some measure them in foot candles, some in watts. Watts really doesn't make sense because as technology changes, different brightness or a similar brightness could be achieved with a lower wattage. And some just have a qualitative statement that digital billboards must dim or brighten to match the ambient lighting conditions. So staff is proposing to go with a measure of foot candles. That's currently how we regulate electronic message boards. It's something we're able to measure. 0.3 foot candles above ambient light levels. It's pretty easy to measure. Just go out there, measure the ambient level, have them shut off the billboard or just block it out with a folder, and see if it's within that 0.3 foot candle difference. And it is an industry accepted standard. Okay, safety provisions. A couple things from the IDOT study. We want to make sure that digital billboards are not in the direct line of sight of drivers, especially looking at a traffic signal. So that's a statement we're proposing to add. And the city engineer would be the person to measure that. Let's see, emergency alerts, proposing very similar language to what Champaign has, that the billboards would all be tied into METCAD, Champaign County's emergency dispatch system, for emergency alerts, Amber alerts, things like that. And finally, malfunctioning OASS. If a billboard malfunctions, it would be required to default to a lower light setting. That way it won't be very bright during the night and blind drivers driving by. Okay, our final set of regulations that we propose have to do with removal and replacement of existing billboards. Most cities have a requirement that in order to install a new digital billboard, existing billboards need to be removed. And not just one-to-one, but usually it's at a different ratio. Again, if you look through the table, different cities have different ratios of what they require. The average is about 1.5 billboard, or 1.5 square feet of billboard should be removed in order to put up 1 square foot of new digital billboard. But those vary. Some go as high as 4-to-1 in certain districts. City of Champaign has the same requirements. They have what they call a sign bank. So in order to build a new billboard, any new billboard in certain districts near campus town or downtown, or in order to do a new digital billboard anywhere in the city, they're required to remove twice as many square feet of signage as they want to put up. So staff is proposing a similar removal and replacement requirement, but we want to incentivize a couple different areas. So we would have kind of a sliding scale where you would get more credit for removing billboards from downtown, from clusters, or from non-conforming locations. So in general, staff is proposing that 4 square feet of regular billboards must be removed in order to establish 1 square foot of new digital billboard. However, to target downtown, that ratio would drop down to 2 to 1. So removing a billboard from before, you would have to remove only 2 square feet to put up 1 square foot. And really, we're talking about 300 square foot billboards, so this would be 600 square feet of downtown billboards they would have to take down to put up a new digital billboard. Clusters as well, we propose a 2 to 1 ratio. And clusters are any property or any lot that has more than 1 sign face that's side by side. So if it's got a back-to-back sign and only 1 back-to-back sign, that wouldn't count. But if there's any side-by-side signs, those would count. And the other incentive would be for other non-conforming billboards that would otherwise conform. So mostly it's for billboards within 1,000 feet of another billboard, or for billboards that are in an improper zoning district or location, for example, along Philo Road. That replacement ratio would be 3 to 1. These incentives are not cumulative, so it's just the most potent incentive would apply in the case that that several could potentially apply. So that is our staff presentation. We can go through photos. We can go through the draft text if you'd like. I'd be happy to answer questions now. And to let you know, there is a representative or representatives from Adams Outdoor Advertising who would also like to speak on this case after staff.
Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Where does the 660-foot buffer range come from?
I'm pretty sure that came from the IDOT standards,
That's
because
what I'm guessing.
and maybe USDOT. It appears in many
It seems plausible for the interstate.
federal.
It seems way too large for University, Cottingham, whatever.
I think that's in federal legislation, so all
Okay.
interstates have that 660.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is more, I guess, a little bit of a procedural question, and I don't know who owns all the signs in town, but how do you regulate removal of, who owns the signs that get removed and who owns the signs that go up? So for instance, Adams has 3 signs that wear out, and I own 1, and I go, oh, 3 are down, I can take mine down and put up a digital sign. How do you regulate, or is it just sort of a, you get it when you come in?
Well, right now, Adams owns all of the billboards in town. So basically, we would cross that bridge when we come to it. If another operator moves into town, they could potentially purchase the rights to existing billboards and remove them.
If I can expand on that question, if a new operator, or if it just happened to be a landowner who wasn't going to be in the billboard business other than utilizing, he just happens to have a piece of real estate that's ideal to do this, Adams would have no incentive to sell to them at any price. I mean, so it seems like we have to get a permit for 3 billboards, conventional billboards, and then tear them down in order to. Something about this seems a little
I think we have really good background on some of the prior text amendments and I think at least 3 rounds of litigation. And one of the effects of the C&U poster litigation was after the settlement expired, we kind of had a land rush on billboards. So in a lot of ways, we're overbuilt on billboards. We have 37, quite a few. We have some congestion. We have limited areas where they're allowed. So I think for these reasons, we have not been adopting regulations that really encourage a more proliferation of billboards because they expanded so much at that time. And we've had, if you look back in the earlier cases, you'll see there's been problems with blockage of other signs, disruption of redevelopment opportunities, just a lot of competition. When Adams bought out, they bought C&U Poster, and then they bought, I think, at least 2 other competitors and bought the whole inventory. That's pretty much what it took to settle things down and to stop the competitive rush in purchasing billboards. So I think when we draft these regulations, we're really trying to keep the inventory, hopefully to reduce it with these trade-offs and not to open up the door unnecessarily. And, if the landscape changes and it becomes competitive again, undoubtedly we would have other forces and come back to our ordinance. We've done 3 or 4 or 5 major overhauls through the years. The industry keeps changing. So I don't know if that helps to have a little bit of that background there.
Well, I read a little bit of that background, and I was doing some online reading about the litigation too, but I'm concerned that I don't want a proliferation of billboards. I like the way this gives an incentive to take down billboards, but in terms of competition so that there actually is a competitive market for billboards, it seems like the way this is written, it almost guarantees that there would never be a competitor.
I think it's really silent on ownership, and I think that's appropriate in a zoning ordinance.
Does anybody else have any questions? Go ahead. Let's go to David Traylor.
Can we introduce Chris?
Oh,
Yep.
I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce. We have 2 new Plan Commission members who were appointed on Monday night by the mayor, and one of them is with us tonight, Christopher Storr. He's a fixture in the historic East Urbana neighborhood area. He's done a lot of volunteered a lot of his time towards civic works, and we're glad to have him.
Go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I've got 2. One has to do with resolution and of the billboards. High resolution in itself can be a distraction, especially if there's an intricate pattern or an optical illusion. I didn't see anything in the ordinance that would cover such a thing. Is that something that might be of a concern?
I think resolution itself, it's a constantly changing field. So if it becomes a problem, that's something we would want to address in the future. But from what we're seeing now, they're mostly pretty much they look the same as a regular billboard. The images, the resolution's like a normal billboard photo. I'm not aware of any with optical illusions. That could be something that we might want to add a reference to.
Another question has to do with fines. Heaven forbid that we should kind of enter a round of inflation, but I've seen it in other countries. The fine is a fixed dollar amount is set there, and if in times of inflation, that might become an inconsequential amount, and might be an incentive for the sign company to pay a fine rather than comply with the ordinance. Is there a way of kind of introducing something into an ordinance that might take into account progressive inflation or
Sure. So in terms of the fines, the fine we proposed was $100 per violation, and the way those are structured is it's $100 per day, basically. And it's true, inflation might make that a rather inconsequential amount, but City Council does annually review all the fines and fees that they charge, that the city charges. So we have an opportunity to address it annually, basically.
I don't know if these would appear on the fee schedule necessarily, but at least once a year, we do omnibus changes to the ordinance, and if we find that the fines are not working, I mean, I think we will have a statutory limit on the fines at some point, but we can modify them, you know, at least on an annual basis, just through our omnibus amendments in the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
I have a related question on fines before I come to you. The fines are stated as minimum fines. Does that mean that at the discretion of the administrator, it could be more than that?
Well, the way we usually handle it is this would be the fine per day, and then the fine would go up like by that amount every day.
It says $50.
It's, well,
I mean, in one
11-94, minimum fine for displaying is $100. Which implies it, I mean, when you say minimum, it implies no less than, but shouldn't it say something like the fine shall be $100 per day or something like that, rather than leaving that ambiguity in there where the intention is for it to be $100 per day, right?
You know, this may be, just for Chris's point about the inflation, I know that we'll have a cap at any point. I think it's $750 for any fine violation would be the maximum. So we would have some statutory limits, but I would suspect that that minimum's in there just to provide some leeway. There may be some other reasons why it's stated as minimum.
David, go ahead with your series of questions.
Just on the fine situation, wouldn't it be good perhaps? I mean, these fines, it seems like to me, are most effective if they create an effective financial disincentive to violate. You know, look at, you know, current bank situation and things like that. I mean, the fines don't seem to be enough to deter behavior. You know, if it becomes a cost of doing business, it's set too low. So I tend to agree. I think that fixed number, especially considering what looks like to be a greatly enhanced revenue stream from these, maybe might mean that we might need a bigger fine structure to make sure that it isn't just a cost of doing business. I had a number of questions, some big, some little. I won't do it in any particular order. First, they can have building up to 660 feet away from, I assume, the center of the roadway or something like that.
Yes, the center line.
I tend to agree that sounds like too big within an urban area. An interstate, yes, but in an urban area. But is there a minimum? I mean, how close can they be?
Yes, I glossed over that, or I didn't mention it at all, but they have to be outside of the required setback. So I think for all of those districts, no, for 3 of those districts, it would be 15 feet from the property line. For IN 2, I think it would be 25 feet.
Which doesn't seem like very much for a 300 square foot illuminated billboard. You have the section that talks about, removing certain amount of square footage in order to put up a new electronic one. Does that include when you're replacing an existing billboard, or only if you're building a new one that didn't exist?
Yes, that would include both situations.
Okay. I don't find the 3 minute to be long enough. I think it should be longer, and I have a couple of reasons for that. A lot of these billboards are not on the interstate. 3 minutes on the interstate is forever. You know, you're going to zoom past it, and it's going to be a long time before it changes again. If you're sitting at a stoplight or, waiting in a line, it may change multiple times. I mean, I would think it would be more distracting, and I would say that we would want something longer than 3 minutes. I don't know how long. A general observation, I've lived in a couple of areas that have had, must have been very early, large digital signs that were close to roadways, not on interstates, but at intersections. Yes, it can be an issue with seeing the lights of the intersection, but another thing that I and many of the people I knew noticed was that the signs, if you're sitting there and it's close to the roadway, tends to destroy your night vision very quickly. They make up if the closer they are and the larger they are, the more of your line of sight they make up. And it can very quickly make it difficult to see pedestrians because you don't realize how much you've lost your night vision, and you can be fairly blind for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds until your eyes start to readjust. And that's somewhat related to ambient light, but it's also it's like sit next to your television in a darkened room, look at it, and then turn around and look at the other wall and see how long it takes before you can really see it. Would it be possible to add something which actually prohibits these from within a certain distance of a pedestrian crosswalk?
That is possible.
Okay. Is it possible to reduce the ambient light by saying they can only use dark backgrounds? Most of the time on a lot of these, what really creates the ambient light is the color of the background of the ad as opposed to the ad itself. The same ad on a dark background produces much less light, less distraction, and looks a lot, less than one on a white background. Is it possible to regulate that?
I don't believe so. That gets into the content neutrality, but it's kind of inadvertently or indirectly regulated when we measure the light levels, because we would measure them at full brightness. And you don't see a lot of ads at full brightness.
It seems like there's something of a difference, though, to me. For instance, the same ambient light in an indirect lighting from a street light, which are designed to point straight down so they don't ever point directly into people's eyes, is completely different from the same level of ambient light concentrated in a billboard, which is coming directly at you. So I don't know how best to do that but I just really, especially not on the interstate, on local roadways, some of which, like if it's along Prospect or something where there's a ton of ambient light, it's not a lot of difference, but other situations it would really make a major contrast between the other lighting in the area. Is it possible to have an expedited process for people in residences that might fall just outside the foot limit, but for whom, for whatever reason, the light from the billboards causes a problem, to raise an objection or file an appeal or something?
Well, when we get complaints, it's pretty much a standard process. We go as soon as possible to set up a measurement or an inspection.
I'm thinking more of it in the permitting process, like
Okay.
a special standing that even though maybe they're outside of the 300-foot limit, but anyone within 600 feet, gets, we have to poll them. I mean, once it's up, it's a little late. There's a substantial financial investment in these, and I know
Right.
most people are hesitant to say, okay, now you have to tear it. I mean, it's not like, okay, turn it the other way. I mean, it's not that simple.
We do have, I don't know if you're going to say the same thing, but we do have rights for folks who experience a light as a nuisance. And the remedy is to remove or reduce the source of the light. So from time to time, we get complaints about parking lot lights that annoy people, and we don't question the extent of the annoyance. Immediately that's a violation, and we ask for that light to be reduced through shielding or relocation. And I think that if we had, if somebody experienced this as a nuisance, we would respond the same way and have the light levels reduced to the point where it was no longer a nuisance. We've been able to, it's not always easy, but we've been able to respond to all of these nuisance complaints and then to address them, and we've not had any accelerate to the point where we couldn't address it. But that is something that it's a little bit subjective to people, but we just identify it as a nuisance if it's experienced. And from
Okay.
time to time, we do get those complaints. And I think somebody maybe annoyed by a digital billboard is just, maybe no more important than somebody annoyed by a parking lot light. It's annoying them,
Right.
if you catch my drift. So
Okay. So you think existing ordinances cover that? And then one last one. You were talking about resolution, but there's one thing that they're experimenting heavily with now, which is 3D. 3D, they've had 3D phones and a number of things that don't require special glasses or whatever, and I would think that we would want an absolute prohibition on 3D technology used in these.
That would be a good some provision to add.
Okay, thank you.
I sort of have a follow-up to the I guess the light level and the fine aspect of it. That seems to be one of the overriding concerns. Should we add that as one of the finable provisions if your sign is too bright and somebody complains and you don't turn it down?
and we can check the fine amounts with the attorneys. That's something that we'll do and make sure that we're within the statutory limits and why the language is the way it is now. We'll follow up with the attorneys on that.
Lou, were you getting my attention for a question? No. Okay, go ahead.
I really like the idea of these digital signs for MedCAD for emergency use. I mean, an Amber Alert was really, I thought that was terrific. How does that work through MedCAD? Can they just bust in and do this, or is it? And are they allowed to, for example, have a scrolling message, which might be very helpful?
For your first question, I'm not sure exactly. I believe it would be hardwired directly, or maybe indirectly through Adams. That might be something they could address, but usually they're not scrolling messages, and I think our prohibition on scrolling messages would continue.
I think I don't know, I'd be willing to at least try the idea of a scrolling message if that, during an emergency circumstance, if that might be, a good means, at least leave open the option.
Here's an example of a standard Amber Alert on a digital billboard. It's basically a short description of the person and the vehicle that they've been last seen in. I don't know if Amber Alerts usually contain more information than that, but all of it appears to fit on one display.
Okay.
We can find out more from the Adams reps, and I'm wondering if we had a different provision, if that might then be, again, getting into that content neutrality that, if it says something, we're alluding to what's being said, so that could be a problem if we addressed it differently.
I was just kind of, my thinking was during an emergency, if you're trying to relay a lot of information to people stuck on a road or traveling, that might be ineffective. I mean, it's not the same thing as trying to get people to learn to speed read or something.
On the Amber Alert, are they allowed to charge Metcad their commercial rates for these? Is this a pro bono? Is this part of the licensing agreement that they have to provide this service?
That's a question for Adams.
But it seems to be a since we're told that Metcad will have access to it, it seems like to some degree, is that a condition that the city is putting on the signs that they must? And if they must,
I think they can explain. We don't have a licensing agreement with Adams, with the billboard companies, so there's no agreement there. The impression I've had is it's something that the billboard companies offer, but I'm sure the folks here tonight will be able to tell us more about that.
so this is a possible benefit, but it's not something that we would assume would be the case. They could change their mind.
Well, it is something that is written into a lot of cities' ordinances, so it would be mandated.
But it would not be mandated in terms of whether it's a public service announcement at no charge or whether...
Right. The ordinances are usually, or all of the ordinances I have seen are all silent on that matter.
Okay. Then I'm interested, in the revenue aspect of this. And I couldn't tell, how are these signs taxed in Illinois? Are they real estate tax? Is it an excise tax? When they switch from a conventional face to the electronic face and the revenue goes up 10 times, does the tax revenue go up correspondingly? So what's the law in Illinois on taxation of these?
That's a good question. In Illinois, unfortunately, these signs are not considered accessible. So the real estate tax, there is no real estate tax for the sign portion of the lot. So that wouldn't change. The city would benefit from increased permit fees. Again, these are up to 10 times as costly to install as traditional billboards. I guess I might ask Max if you noticed anything on that. This is our planning intern, Max Mahalik, and he helped out a tremendous amount with our research on this case.
Thanks. Yes, in terms of taxation, Illinois, as Jeff has iterated, does not apply the real estate tax to the sign. Now, most of the revenue increases in Illinois communities that allow digital billboards has come then directly through these permit fee increases, building permits, other such construction permits. On top of that, zoning permits. Typically in Illinois, the cost of the building permit is about double. And now Urbana, it's a little bit differently. Currently, we have an initial base fee, and then we charge, I believe it is $6 per, let me check really fast here. It's an incremental amount according to how much construction cost there is. So it's not based on the size of the billboard currently. So that does differ from the rest of the municipalities in Illinois. There might be local taxation policies applied. I haven't seen nothing really stated in any of the ordinances, of course, or just on the general websites that are providing information in regards to digital billboards. But yes, most communities have seen revenue increases just through the permitting fees.
And we could ask Adams if there's things like sales tax or other types of taxes.
Yeah, I think that is good. You know, is there any kind of personal taxes that are paid? But it is a concern. You know, the sign permit fees are very nominal in the big scheme. So when you talked about, well, let's increase the setback, immediately what I'm thinking is, oh, that's more of a developable lot that would be taken up by the billboard. So that is a concern. You know, if they're placed, it's a concern from an economic development standpoint and a redevelopment standpoint. If a billboard is placed on a lot in such a way that you can't build on the lot, the community will not see real estate from that property for all intents and purposes. And something we do get concerned about in Urbana, we're 28% of our land area. Max has helped us map that, is now tax exempt. And I think that's why you see in the provisions that if there's a development agreement, a TIF development agreement on a property, then that's barred from having a billboard. And again, that's just so that we can preserve the development areas. And, you know, hopefully the billboards are placed on, you know, small pieces of property and not in such a way as to prevent development or block development in other locations. And then the fiscal impact on the community can be reduced. So I think, you know, I think the economic benefits of billboards relate to the ability for private business to advertise and build their commerce. That's the economic argument. That's a little more, in my opinion, the building permits it's pretty negligible. So,
I'd like to request, you know, some research be done and see whether there's any precedent for municipalities charging an annual fee, because what I learned in Wisconsin, for example, it was taxable improvements, real estate improvements, until the current administration, and the law was changed so that it's not taxable as a real estate improvement. In Madison, which is a much larger city, lost $1.5 million in real estate taxes, but of course they were going against national billboard firms that can also donate generously to the state party. So it's one of these things where the state government took away the local property tax. So I'd like to have some research done on the possibility of perhaps having an annual fee on electronic signs, so that it recognizes that it actually is a real estate improvement under a sort of common sense understanding of the code.
Now, this is pretty negligible, but for example, Arlington, Texas has a $200 annual fee on digital billboards. It's not a huge amount, and we can look into the taxation research that is out there, or any other kind of annual fee research. But there is a precedent for cities charging annual fees that are not related to just building permits, construction permits, or changes to the billboard.
Are any of those in Illinois, Max? Do you know?
Unfortunately, not in front of me, but I can definitely take a look.
we can look into it, but I'm fairly certain we cannot do this in Illinois. And maybe the representatives will be able to tell us. But I think if we could do that, it would be being done. So.
Lou.
So I've got two new questions. One from something Libby just said. The TIF exclusion, the way I read it here was a TIF project. Is it a project or a district from which this is included?
Development agreement. It needs to be a project. Can't be TIF-wide.
Okay,
Yeah.
and it is not city expenditure of TIF funds doesn't count then. It's only a development agreement. So when the city spends TIF funds to redo all the sidewalks,
It's just the development.
agreement with a specific private party.
Yeah, when we
Okay.
added this, there were limits on what we could do, but that was something that we could sustain if it was something that would contradict a development. We were safe to add that exclusion, but a blanket exclusion was not.
I understand.
not
I
have
just want to
been-
make sure that I understood what
Yeah.
this was meant to say.
Yes.
And the second thing is on the fines, which don't say per day anywhere that I can find. And I thought it did. And the $50 fine is in violation of section 9.4. The $100 fine is in section 9.6. But it's not clear to me what distinction is being made. There's no other difference in the language between those two lines. 9.4 is mostly about on-site signs, and 9.6 is about OASS. So I'm not sure whether the $50 fine is intended to apply to what's for today called non-billboards, and the $100 fine is intended to apply to billboards. But if that's the case, I think we need to make that explicit because some parts of section 9.4 also apply to billboards as I read it. In any case, I think those two statements are sufficiently imprecise that they don't say what they intend to say.
Any other questions for staff? So, a parliamentarian can help me out here. We go now to public comment from anybody who would like to address this plan case. Is there anybody who would like to approach the, there's a sign-in sheet there. Put in your name and address and introduce yourself to the commission.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Kane Kaiser. I'm the real estate manager with Adams Outdoor Advertising, and this is Amanda Beckler, our general manager. We just wanted to thank the staff again for bringing this to you guys and for this discussion. We reviewed the ordinance, and overall we were happy to work with them on it. And we do have a couple issues we just would like to bring up and see if we can get some changes done. And I guess I'll just jump into those, and then we can have questions afterwards if you guys have any further. One thing that we would like to see is the conversion of existing signage, especially along the commercial corridors of University Avenue, Cunningham Avenue, Lincoln Avenue. Due to the nature of the current ordinance, as you saw, most of our signs are non-conforming. Most of our signs are along those corridors are in the correct zoning districts. B3 being the most general zoning district. We would like to see the ability to be able to convert those, and we're only talking 2 to 3 max in the whole city, because each location is specifically selected due to client demand, traffic, height, just general location overall. And the leasing situation with the property owner, whether we own the property, have a long-term lease, short-term lease, whether we've purchased an easement from the property owner, just overall property rights as well. So I think that's I guess first and foremost for us, being able to find a location that fits us within the correct zoning districts on an existing sign. We're not talking about adding additional sign poles to install our digital displays. The second issue that we'd like to discuss is the 3-minute dwell time. when we started this project a few years ago, Libby's been great to work with through the process. We sell our digital billboards as a network, which throughout our company, we are throughout 14 markets, and through all our local ordinances, we have 10-second dwell times, which is how long the advertiser can be up there before it switches. And in order for the clients to be able to purchase our network, we would like to see uniformity through both cities. We have 8 advertisers that run on all of our digital units, and if we sold a network to them, their spot would only come up every 24 minutes in Urbana. And, like a service location like Barbecue Place or another food restaurant, half their rush hour, half their good time when they would like their advertising to be up there, they could be, on the back burner when someone else is up there being displayed.
A lot of our advertisers have come to us, and they want to have equal representation in Champaign and in Urbana. And if we have a difference in times, we still won't be able to accommodate that. So that's why having that uniformity will allow us to have them participate in a network, whether it's being on one in Urbana and one in Champaign, or 2 and 2, or so and forth.
And we also have national clients that come to us, and they'll buy, Charlotte, North Carolina, or Ypsilanti, Madison, Wisconsin, and Champaign, and they like to run, very similar campaigns. So, did we hit?
6 a.m. to midnight.
Oh yeah, and we with our digital displays, so that in the middle of the night there's less of a light distraction. We run our digital billboards from 6 a.m. to midnight, so from 12:01 to 5:59 they are off.
And off being black. There were some questions about Metcad. One thing at Adams that we take pride in is being a local business and being able to support the communities that we're in. Public service announcements, having digital billboards with 8 advertisers or businesses on them gives us more freedom to do more for the communities. And the way that Metcad works is they have a username and password that automatically, for an Amber Alert, like this past Monday, they basically, they take over our digital billboards. It's an automatic thing. It's something that we grant them the right to do that, and we provide that at no charge as a public service announcement to the communities.
We also like to partner with the the Champaign Police Department, any police department that is operating within the municipality that would like to utilize it. I've partnered with the Champaign Public Works for road conditions. They like to do a construction season design and a winter design depending on how the weather is. So we enjoy
You're
our
on the
partnership.
Crime
Yeah, and
Stoppers
I'm on the
board.
Champaign County Crime Stoppers board, and I work with them to get them their vinyls, and we get them rotating around town to spread the word on how to contact us. So overall, we enjoy our partnerships with the cities, and we look forward to continuing that with Urbana.
Questions? Go ahead.
Could you repeat what the dwell time is that you're seeking, please?
Yeah, 10 seconds, which is IDOT recommends 10 seconds for digital billboards. Between 8 and 10 is what we really see, but as a company, we've set our standard at 10 to have a uniformity across all markets.
Lou?
The first issue you raised about getting digital billboards on Cunningham and North Lincoln, I guess. I didn't understand what the constraint was that you were trying to address in that case?
Well, currently, with the current ordinance, they are legal non-conforming signs, so we cannot alter those signs, change them in any way. So what we would like to see is the ability to select a location in an appropriate zoning district and convert at least one of those displays to a digital display. With currently, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, just to clarify, so in order to install a digital display, they would need to bring a billboard into conformance. So it would have to be in the right zoning district, and it would have to be 1,000 feet away from other billboards, things like that.
Okay, but the actual issue here is the 1,000 feet between billboards. Is that the case?
That's one of the biggest issues, yes.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at, because it's not the zoning districts that's at issue in these places.
Right, yeah, most
at
of
least
our
according to the
billboards are
map
in the
that
correct
I've
zoning
seen.
districts, but yes, the spacing is a big
The
issue.
signs in size are all conforming, so it's the 1,000 feet that matters.
Correct.
Okay, that's,
I think map D shows that the best, Exhibit
Right.
D.
I just, it wasn't clear from the way it was presented whether that was the only issue from their point of view, and that's what I wanted to clarify.
So I'm still a little slow. So that would mean you're asking for permission to convert any of your signs to digital without a reduction that has been
No,
proposed?
we would do the reduction, but we would like to be able to select, a sign that we believe would be the best return on investment when we actually do install the face.
I see.
So to be able to pick from any of the 37.
Yeah, to be able to pick from the 37 faces, obviously we would still have to do the takedown,
2, 3, or 4.
Okay.
Yeah, 2, 3, or 4.
That
but be able to
helps
select
clarify
those.
what you're asking for. David?
I guess I'm still not clear. So you're saying that among all, apparently you now control all the billboards in town. So you're saying that you really would like to have 2 or 3 billboards, even though you get rid of other ones, that would be closer than 1,000 feet to each other?
Well,
2 or 3 digital billboards.
Oops, sorry. No, the digitals would be further than 1,000 feet apart due to the distribution we would like to see for a network. But we're talking about current locations that are existing that are less than 1,000 feet apart. We'd like to select a face that we could convert, and therefore it would still be less than 1,000 feet apart from another billboard location.
So if I can, let's just use an example of Lincoln and University, which has 8. So it wouldn't, okay, and for the incentive, because it's a cluster, it's removal of 2, right?
Yes.
Okay, but as you can see here, it's blue underneath, which means it's an allowable location, but those yellow circles, do you see the 8 there at Lincoln and University? They would have to, in essence, in order to make one conforming site, they probably need to, it's probably only one that they could place there.
Right.
Probably. So then that would mean more like if you really want to have a digital billboard, there would be removal of the 8 non-conforming to create one conforming site.
Doesn't that actually further the intent of the ordinance? If it's to remove billboards and space them out further, isn't that just an effective ordinance?
Yes, in that location it would.
And let's suppose we added something that prohibited them within a certain distance of a pedestrian crosswalk. Wouldn't those be gone anyway? Those locations be ineligible at that point?
Depends on the distance. I think that would, relate to the visibility and the distance from the intersection. So it's hard to say without doing a site analysis.
Anybody else have questions? Thank you for coming and responding to our questions, and
No problem. Thank
we'll
you
now
very
ask
much.
for additional public comment.
Thank you.
I think,
Oh, did
I think this might be, you gave us something you didn't intend
I gave
to.
I gave you what I was going to keep. I'd be happy to make copies of them. I think I got maybe I was lucky enough to get enough. Hi. So, as you're receiving these, so I'm here as my name is Dennis Roberts. I'm here just as a person who's interested in the environment of the community, and you know, the potential effect of granting a change in their digital and our billboard ordinance. And I appreciate the fact that Adams Outdoors is interested in Urbana. You know, I think that's a good thing always to have that. I would encourage the Planning Commission, though, to remain fairly independent in making in choosing to form, shape, and word an ordinance which is going to govern Adams Outdoor Sign Company, being the only sign company in town. So to receive and to work to address every issue totally from the point of view of the petitioner, I don't think would probably serve the community completely. I think we have to have our own independent, judgmental ability to resource and to examine all the points that are being brought up. So as an individual, I have a range of questions about the upcoming ordinance, many of which I'm not going to mention tonight, but I thought I would just address the written ordinance as it was presented. And these are my thoughts on it, which I'd like to just have you consider, and I'm certainly hoping that this consideration continues for a month or two so that you can get further public input. And what I want, I think, is one of those copies back so I could read it to you.
Wait, the commissioners need it, so let's take care.
You had extra, perhaps?
No, share one. The interest of moving the thing along, so I could use that.
All right. All right. So, first of all, let's just remember that that the city is a home rule city, and that we can actually choose to allow or disallow digital advertising in our community. We don't have to necessarily accept it as a concept. We can choose the parameters under which you know, we're allowing the experience to be guided, and we can choose the parameters about timing, brilliance, and all the things that you've been mentioning so far and have had questions about. Staff mentioned that there had been a study in Sweden that had took place in 2010, and that that the information about the effect of distracted driving remains unresolved. What wasn't mentioned, however, was that as a result of the study that was taking place, where they found 80% of all car crashes involved driver inattention prior to the crash, and this is inattention of between 2 and 3 seconds, that it actually, they felt, had a very strong effect on safety on their highways. And as a result, the Swedish government, which had authorized the erection of digital billboards in 2009, rescinded their billboard ordinance and removed all digital billboards from their nation. So what wasn't given to you is that if you don't follow through and look a little bit more into some of the effects of digital billboards in driving, you may not understand that there's been a country that completely now bans digital billboards. So, I mean, it could be that if Urbana chose to do something similar, it wouldn't really be the only city in the world who had concerns about it. We've talked here about hold time. The billboard company would like to see the 10-second rule, and that was allowed for small display signs here in Urbana, I believe, at businesses and business locations. No, I guess it was 3 minutes. But some towns in the United States, and they're pointed out here as East Point, Georgia, requires 6 minutes, and Bloomington, Minnesota, requires a 20-minute flicker time or turnaround time. So we don't necessarily have to pick the smallest amount of time. We have the right to follow our own safety feeling. And David Trail, you mentioned that you've already experienced living in a community and you have concerns about three-minute rule as being perhaps too fast at an intersection where traffic is slow or is standing waiting for a red light over a series of red lights. And I agree with that. So I would recommend that you consider a 6-minute change time for any signage image. There were some ratios proposed for exchanging regular signage to digital. And on some of them, we were offering for every 2 square feet of a regular sign be removed, that there could be a 1 foot square of digital space. And it was interesting that the ordinance that I picked up at the office this afternoon on page 8, which shows the language for the ordinance, that on A and B it's 2 square feet, and I would recommend that it really be 3. But why don't we get rid of more signage and take the advantage of having our own decision on that for the removal of signage? As a matter of fact, as far as being in the B4 area, I might even say just eliminate it completely and not have them in that area. That's already a high-density area. So, I mean, that's something that we could consider. I would like to bump up the fee schedule for non-conforming signs which were scrolling, moving, or something like that. And I think the $50 one apparently doesn't apply for Section 9-4. That was the $50 fee. Then the other one is Section 9-6. The recommended fine is $100 for noncompliance. I think that we shouldn't tolerate it at all. I think we should. These are digitally mastered and programmed signs, and they can be entered into the programming for not to be scrolling. We could have that. We could have that as a requirement. And I think that if ever we found out that there was noncompliance, I think that the fee should be stronger, because this is potentially a disruptive and dangerous thing for drivers. And the idea of having scrolling messages, I think, should be completely eliminated. It's not allowed on our small signage in this, under the current sign ordinance. And the larger these things are, the more distracting they are. So certainly what we want is a static illuminated image if we're going to accept this at all, and that the change time should, I think, be 6 minutes, not 3 minutes. What we want to do is avoid visual distraction as signs change over. I think that's for safety. I would say that the distance between signs might be reconsidered. we're talking about 1,000 feet between signs. But if you look at the chart that's provided by the research, which was piece of evidence number G, or on your exhibit G, you'll see that on the first page there are some municipalities which have short distances between billboards, but several that have long distances, including one that's 1,000, and in Gaines, Michigan, 4,000. If you turn the page then to the second part of that chart, every single municipality listed has a minimum of 1,000 feet, but there are many that have 2,000, 2,640, 3,000, 2,000, 1,500. I think that we don't have to be on the short end of placing signage into the city, and I think that we can be a little more protective of our property by picking a larger radius for the distance between, especially digital signs, because of their impact visually.
Excuse me, in the interest of time, we normally, I've been letting you go a bit long. We don't have a long list of people, but we're after 9.
So I only have one more point.
Sure.
And that is, the city spends thousands of dollars on street beautification, and we have several major arteries in the town that have beautification plans adopted by the city. Some of them have not been fulfilled, but we do have plans, for street beautification, which includes landscaping and many other features which are listed here on my paper. So I would recommend that any of these arteries that have a beautification plan in place that's already been adopted by the city be automatically off limits for the erection of digital signs. I think that the two are not compatible. I think that beautification plans that have been adopted by the city in the past already should be more important than commercial gain that might occur or may be possible to the company by the erection of a digital sign. So these are just questions that pertain specifically to wording within the ordinance and have nothing to do with some of the other larger concerns that I could address, but I won't today. Okay, thanks very much.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Roberts?
Dennis, which of the areas that that signage is allowed are also being considered for or have beautification plans?
Well, I listed 3: University Avenue, Cunningham Avenue,
and Broadway.
And Broadway. So Broadway is more or less a downtown experience, so that wouldn't really have an effect. But Cunningham Avenue is a very long stretch, and I would think that would certainly be something that one would want to preserve for beautification rather than for signage.
Any other questions? Thank you for your input and your careful research on your presentation. Do we have any other public comment? Staff, any additional? Well, I guess we're ready for discussion among ourselves.
Just
Oh,
one
I'm sorry.
other addition
Sorry, I didn't catch it.
of information. Chicago does have an annual fee with the billboards as well. Now, I'm not sure the direct amount because I have no access to that, but I was looking for my information. They do charge a fee, so there's precedent within Illinois.
Thank you.
So I guess I would start by saying I would operate in this discussion on the presumption that we are not sending this forward this evening to the city council. And I guess I'm stating that up front to make sure that's not a surprise to somebody.
Yeah, I think there's some things to follow up, that we can follow up on and talk with legal staff and do a little more research, and we're happy to do that.
So discussion is sort of about staff direction for revisions.
That's
I
the way
see
I
it.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
okay.
concur with that. I wouldn't be ready to move
So
ahead tonight.
some things that I've heard that would be relevant. The 3D question is something we could deal with. Because the number of possibilities of where signs can be located is quite limited, it seems to me that we could experiment essentially with differences in things like the distance between signs. And looking at this quickly, I'm thinking it's easiest to look at North Cunningham and in effect say, if we're going to have digital signs, where would we actually want them? Because there are very few places that are actually going to end up. And if one of the places that we want them is where an existing non-conforming sign is, which actually on North Cunningham anyway seems to me plausible, then thinking about how the ordinance could be written to encourage that seems to be worthwhile. And the thing that seems to matter is the 1,000-foot limit. And I in real time, I can't quite come up with a way to deal with that, but it seems to me to be a question. A question I have is, can we find out what the longest dwell time of a traffic light in Urbana is? I'm guessing it's at University and Cunningham because of the number of turns, but I could be wrong. And if we know that the ordinance precludes anything other than what appears on this map, then it's irrelevant to look at dwell times on Florida and Lincoln, for example. But I'm guessing that it's less than 3 minutes. But it might be close to 3 minutes. And it seems to me that the thing that we want to minimize, we don't want there to be 2 changes during a traffic light dwell time. All right? If there are any changes, then some of those changes are going to occur during some traffic light dwell time in some direction. But it seems to me that's actually the issue in the city is I don't want to be sitting at a traffic light and be trying to watch for, or coming to a traffic light, trying to watch caution or trying to watch the left turn caution or trying to watch whatever, and suddenly have the sign over there change.
Don't you have the wrong metric there? Wouldn't it really be that you would want the vast majority of drivers at that intersection to never see a change? Not 2 changes,
right,
but never see one.
And the way to accomplish that is to have no digital
significantly
signs.
longer than 3
right.
minutes.
I mean, once a month would do that, and if they were changed after midnight, that would be fine.
I would be fine with once a month. I
but
haven't polled I'm not sure.
I guess what I'm trying to do is get at if we're going to end up discussing the margins around 10 seconds, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever, it seems to me that then is the question.
Well, given the rather hysterical long-range transportation plan that we were presented, which seems to think that congestion is going to increase exponentially over the next 10 or 15 years, you may be sitting through multiple lights at University and Cunningham at times.
Right. No, I grant you all of those things. I'm just, the 3 minutes seems like a sort of, well, it seems like it's insufficiently supported.
Vague.
What real reasons do we have for 3, 4, 2, 6, 10? Obviously, eventually, the longer it gets, the fewer changes anybody sees. I agree. No, that's clear.
In some ways, I almost go the other way, because I drive down Cunningham almost every day from Perkins Road to University Avenue. And if we had one digital billboard that changed every 3 minutes, I bet I would not see it change in a month. And it probably takes me 45 seconds to drive the entire way if the light at Kerr Avenue is green. I don't care if it changes every minute. It's not going to affect me whether it's a minute or 3 minutes. And I think that's the same thing at an intersection.
Well, but that's why dwell times matter, because if you do that whole distance in 45 seconds, then if it changes every 3 minutes, 6 minutes, you're almost never going to see one.
Right.
But if you're sitting at the intersection of Cunningham and University, which has left turns and left turn lights in all directions, and one of the highest accident events is a left turn. I mean, the most recent one on University Avenue where somebody was killed was a left turn case. And the billboards, some of them are placed, in that case, there's 4 faces that I look at when I'm trying to turn left from Vine onto University. I think that's where the 4 are. And if one of those is digital and it's changing, I've got a green light to watch, or a caution light to watch, or a left turn signal to watch. And right there in my view is going to be a digital sign.
I don't disagree with that, but the metric is, it might change when you're approaching there, it might not. And if it's going to change, it's just going to change once, and then you're through your difficult driving part. I don't know what to call it,
Right.
but it's not going to change sequentially to make a
If
difference.
it's 10 seconds, it is.
10 seconds.
Because I'm waiting at that traffic light longer than 10 seconds. It means it's going to change when the green arrow for left comes on. It's going to change again when the caution comes on. It's going to change again when the caution comes on for all traffic going the other direction. And it's going to change again when that light goes red. In any case, you could argue that the ordinance currently has that our city engineer is going to not allow a digital sign there anyway. Though that part of the ordinance, I think, is also a little vague. But that's what I'm trying to get to, is if it changes at all, it's going to change during some aspect of being
Right.
at a traffic light. But I don't want it changing more than once.
Can
So,
I make it just a quick, that we have to support a longer one, but my question is, what's the argument for a shorter one, other than someone can make more money if it's shorter? I mean, it's, I don't see that we have to have a rationale that says, oh, okay, this is exactly what we make it. We want to make it the length that we want, as opposed to, is there any reason that says we need to make it that short or that long or whatever? I mean, if there's an actual traffic reason or whatever, and I think there are some arguments, but I don't see that we're bound by any of those anyway. I mean, if we decided as a community we don't want it to change more than once a day, what would prevent us from doing so?
We can do that. We cannot have digital signs at all. I mean, but all I'm saying is, it's a different question. So in order to have the discussion about traffic lights, one of the things that would be interesting for staff to collect is, what's the dwell time? How does a signal at University
Well,
of
I
Cunningham
think
work?
Both the Cunningham University and also the Lincoln University, because the stationary signs there bug me coming
Yeah, and it
into
may be
that
the
on the
Lincoln ones that
northbound
I'm
in
actually
particular,
thinking
and-
of.
And so
Especially depending on the time of day and the lighting conditions. Bothers me too.
some other information that I'd be curious, we talk about the candle lumens, the candle measurement, foot candles. No more than 0.3 above the ambient light. Could you get me some data? I'm just curious on the fixed signs that have the indirect lighting flashing off with some of the reflective coating. What's the reflective there just as a basis of comparison. Because I see two issues here. One is every 10 seconds these things scrolling, and if you're on a long stretch, you might be 30 seconds on University and be watching down there for the next image to come up. So I think that's a big issue for me, but I'm just curious, how much, so if the thing is not moving very often, what actually is the difference in the way it jumps out and grabs me compared to a really brightly lit? And I don't know what sort of restrictions we have on the current lighting. Do we have restrictions on how much light they can throw up on the signs now?
I think it's just complaint driven now.
It's just
Complaint driven.
complaint driven.
Yeah, sort of on the same thing as, it just seems to me there has to be a difference and the effect of the brightness depending on the apparent size of the sign. You know, a 300 square foot sign 600 feet from the roadway at a certain brightness is going to have a big difference on your vision, and if it's 50 feet from the roadway and fills a quarter of your, you know, of your peripheral vision to the right side, I just like, I would almost like, the closer to the road it is and the closer to you, the dimmer it should have to be. If it's 600 feet, it's on the interstate and it's 600 feet away, you can make it pretty bright and it isn't going to bother anyone under any lighting conditions. But if it's 25 feet from the roadway, especially in an intersection or something, and it's that same brightness, it's going to have a lot more effect.
I'm going to ask something totally unrelated. And I don't know the answer to this question. Does Metcat have the ability to charge fees for something? I'm driving at, if we require in the ordinance that they have to allow Metcad to override their sign, does Metcad, and I don't know if this makes a difference, but does Metcad have the ability to say, okay, now you have a digital billboard, we're going to charge you $100,000 to use our service? The billboard, they have to allow Metcad to override their sign. Can Metcad charge them a fee to do that? Since we're requiring them to allow
We're
it?
not requiring them.
It's in the ordinance. It says they have to, Metcad has to be able to override their sign.
We're not requiring Metcad to do
What page are you on?
Well, I just got this copy. On number 5, it says they have to allow Metcad to basically override their
Okay.
sign to provide messages. Can Metcad charge them to do that?
You know, I think we'll bring that up with legal and make sure we're not setting that up. That's certainly
Okay.
not the intention.
I know it's not the intention,
Yeah,
but
but that's a good question, so.
All right.
Good question. I had overlooked that.
I sometimes drive up in Chicago, and on Interstate 80, or excuse me, 90, as you're going into the city, there's a digital outdoor sign, and it changes pretty frequently, and it's in possibly the worst possible place you could put one, right on a curve in a busy interstate. And I don't really recall seeing too much of a problem in driving there because people are too dang scared about getting clobbered to pay too much of attention. I think that the driver distraction may be more individual than we'd like to think. And some people may be more distracted or have a particular interest in something on the sign than depending on on something that they're interested in. I think that the idea of replacing some of the static signs with a digital sign is not a bad idea. I rather favor it. It reduces the signage, and I think that that the digital signs offer some pretty potentially useful features, especially in times of an emergency, Amber Alert, or some road hazard, or some slow traffic because of something further down the road, and that I rather like that. And I'd like to hear more discussion about the dwell time. I don't think that it should kind of be onerous. I think having a change in the sign display is not, for many people, going to be all that much of a problem. But I'd sure like, but I don't disagree that it can be distracting, and my principal concern kind of relates to what David was saying about the 3D, and I was kind of getting to that with the resolution, only I didn't know that what I was headed toward was the 3D. I may not be quite so much of a topic of a concern at this particular time, but I think in the future, as resolution increases and technology changes, we may have to revisit that because it can be enticing. Thank you.
So are you clear on the sorts of information we're asking for? Should we review the list of
I could go through real quickly. Let's see, there was a question about adding a buffer near crosswalks, prohibiting 3D displays, check in with legal about the maximum fines. Let's see, precedents for annual fees in Illinois. Let's see. Clearing up the language about fines in regards to 9-4 and 9-6, which applies to billboards, which applies to other signs. Let's see. Where was? Okay.
Traffic signals, dwell time?
Yep. Traffic signal dwell times. Yeah, separation distances, what different scenarios would look like with different buffers between digital signs. Let's see.
and candle feet on a conventional sign that's
Yep.
brightly lit.
There's some comments on placement of the sign. Should they're closer to the road, should the illumination be lower? That was one. There was a legal question on NetCAD. Could they, then charge an arm and a leg, or, does it expose them to that liability? Which I think that we ought to be able to reword that.
I think, could you also, under the 3D, also look at the thing about the optical illusion and
Mhm.
the intricacies of patterns? I realize it's kind of a content thing, but it,
I think we might be able to look at the resolution, your question about resolution
I
as
sure
well,
would.
so.
thank you.
Anybody have anything else? So we're agreed, we'll, go ahead.
One last thing. To me, there's two very different areas that we're talking about. I mean, you have the kind of what used to be the traditional billboard, which is along the interstate. And a lot of the areas where billboards can be placed are along the interstate. And it seems to me in a lot of these that's a very different roadway than Cunningham or University, but we're trying to shoehorn them all into one set of regulations. And I'm wondering if maybe we really need to do them as apply different rules to them, not because of the zone that's next to the road, but because of the character of the road itself. Something that goes back to the difference between zooming along Cunningham and being at an intersection on Cunningham. I mean, parts of Cunningham are very different than other parts. So I don't know that we want to do that, but it just seems like to me they're very different situations.
I agree with you, David. I think that, you know, there's a big distinction between driving along a long linear section of road versus standing at versus going through an intersection. They're different circumstances.
I have personally a much bigger difference in idea of what an acceptable dwell time would be along the interstate than I would at University in Cunningham.
I haven't heard anything in the list that we've talked about that would be troubling to investigate, but I do feel that we're attempting to overlay permissions for a new type of billboard, the digital billboards. Underneath this, we have our existing OASS regulations, and those were prepared, how can I put this, as part of another settlement. As resolution from another complaint, and was carefully negotiated to avoid many years of more costly litigation to both satisfaction of the city and Adams. So what you see is lawful and was accepted by both parties, and is constitutional and has worked well for us since we adopted those. So I would be concerned if we dug into just the regular OASS regulations. That's a whole other, you know, it took a lot of work to bring you this set for digital. So I want to make sure that we don't dig too far into billboard regulations as a whole, because that's a whole other matter, and would take another level of rigorous review. And this is a good ordinance as it stands. It's good, it's lawful, it served the city, it's been acceptable to Adams. So it's just a caution, and I haven't heard anything tonight that, you know, I think that we're undermining what we accomplished before, but that's something to bear in mind. So. Also, another comment, some of you were getting at, well, we could test different things, and I think it really does help to know, well, Adams, you know, where do your customers want this? Where do you want this? Would that be palatable? And one of the commissioners said, well, where do we want the digital billboards? I don't know if we can probably all agree on that, but I think it is useful, and I don't know, you know, how forthcoming Adams would want to be, but I think it's an exercise that can really help us in pinning down what the proper trade-offs are and the distances are and the locations, you know, to share some of that information. I think, you know, tonight they talked about 2 to 3 max. You know, I think that, you know, they might be amenable to answering questions, and that might help the Plan Commission as it seeks to improve this set of regulations. So that's another suggestion.
Libby, I appreciate your background about the current ordinance, and in the packet where there was a summary of that. I understand that part of the issues there were trying to tighten the restrictions of existing ordinances, which then resulted in lawsuits and then a window of opportunity to maximize and then a settlement. Is it correct that currently that it's much easier to draft an ordinance covering digital, that we don't have anything now, so they have no investment in it, they have no right to do it. But once we do draft an ordinance, if we would try to become more restrictive we would then open ourselves up to the sort of issues that precipitated the events from a generation ago that,
Not necessarily. That's a good legal question, but I think that, if we somehow adopt something that's don't like the results, I think that we still have an opportunity to come back and look at it again. I don't think we're bound at that point. I think throughout we want to be really careful. That's why we do so much research in what other communities do and what the case law is and what the other laws are, so that we're, within a norm and that we're thinking through very carefully. The two criteria we spent a lot of time on tonight are traffic safety and aesthetics. And those have been tested as, relevant and pertinent to regulating billboards. So it doesn't mean, that we're locked in. We continue to revise these regulations with the cooperation and the help of the industry representatives, because the industry keeps changing. And sometimes, you don't anticipate things. My first involvement with billboards in Urbana was completely about aesthetic concerns. That was our concern early on, because there was a billboard company that came to town and they put up really horrible looking billboards, very industrial. And, previously we had another monopoly in town, the CNU Poster, and they prided themselves on architecturally sensitive. They were national leaders in architecturally sensitive, context-sensitive billboards. So when a competitor came to town and built something that would really only work in an industrial park, that prompted us to say, look, we want to see some architectural cladding, some landscaping. We've moved beyond that now and are addressing other concerns. And the case law keeps evolving. The concern with content neutrality was not as prevalent. When I first started in the year 2000 and dealing with our billboard regulations, that's very important now to remove reference to that. So I think we'll be, every few years we'll see, more opportunity to improve what we have.
Could I, Libby, getting back to this issue that you addressed in part about the distinction between billboards at intersections and billboards along a area far from an intersection or between intersections. Is that something that would be difficult to deal with?
I don't know that I've seen regulations address that. I think billboards like being at corners often. They like to be at corners and corridors. We've introduced this notion of the traffic signal visibility, and I think that's something that came out of the IDOT study along University, because that was a cause of one of the fatalities. But I don't know that I've seen other ordinances that say it needs to be so many feet back from an intersection. Max, is that?
Did you have a different type of maybe dwell time or spacing or certain technical aspect?
Just in terms of distance from intersections, there hasn't been that much articulated in the ordinances. Now, they have been prohibiting, of course, as we've just noted, is similar to the findings with the study on University Avenue, is removing them from the line of sight of the driver. Now, most communities, of course, have established already sign regulations with setbacks regulations, and those vary by community, and those would apply to the static as well as dynamic billboards, and I've seen them range anywhere from 15 to 50 feet, depending on what community you're working with and what kind of zone you're working with and what the street type is. There has been some discussion about wider streets having farther setbacks versus some narrower streets or vice versa, depending on what kind of community you're working with. And we could definitely take a look into how that might vary, especially with Illinois examples taking the lead there.
I think if we were going to look at different dwell times, you know, maybe more at an intersection and less along the corridor, you know, there might be a traffic safety basis to do that. I think practically it might be difficult. You know, they're talking about, well, they want to standardize. So I don't know if that would be completely impractical, you know, from the industry standpoint, to have different dwell times given location. And I don't know that we've seen that, but if there's a traffic safety reason to do so, I would think that would be possible. And we, you know, we may want to ask about some of these with our consulting experts and see what they think.
Okay, not seeing further discussion, let's close the discussion of this plan case and continue it to the next meeting. And now I've lost my agenda. We'll go back now to the update of the Plan Commission's official bylaws, which was the object of discussion at the last session.
Yeah, we've incorporated the comments from the study session at the last Plan Commission meeting, and we've handed it out. So according to the bylaws, you cannot actually vote on them at this time, but you basically just, we distribute the written copy, and then you can take a vote at the next meeting following that.
Okay.
That's this thing right here.
So there's no, any editorial changes in terms of language changes? Someone sees that after the meeting, they could contact you, it could be corrected, or would that move it back another? This should be
Yeah, that would push the clock back
Okay.
again, yes.
Okay, so hopefully everything is, go ahead.
Trying to find it. The somewhere we have the statement about findings, and it is not underlined even though it is a change. But why can't I find it?
It's Article 7.3. Unless the motion explicitly
Yeah, right.
includes additional findings, the staff report constitutes the findings of the commission. Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah. So 7.3 has been changed. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it needs to be red line strikeout. And presumably you can figure it out.
Anybody else catch anything?
I don't know if we need to add it, but for instance, tonight we had to select a new chairperson, and that's not really on the order of business. Do we need to put it in there? That if there's not one here, do we need to select one? It's in the order of business. If we don't have a chairperson, the chairperson's not present, do we need to, does that need to be a line item in there?
No, it's Article 3, number 2.
But it's not in the order of business.
Oh.
So according to order of business, if the chairperson's not here, we can't start the meeting at all.
We can check with legal
Okay.
division to see if that's necessary.
Anything else? So if not, I'll close the hearing on the Plan Commission bylaws. And we will go to new business. Any new business?
None.
None.
Any audience participation? If anyone would like to address the commission, you can come to the microphone and you have 5 minutes.
Carol McCusick, 1907 North Cunningham Avenue. This note you just made that the markup wasn't there under determinations number 3 reassures me a little bit, because I was looking at the broken out part of 6, procedures for hearings, and it didn't look like all of the markup that happened at the study session was reflected in the copy. And then I was wondering whether, okay, like if there were layers of amendment, and you were printing it, maybe you wouldn't print all of, maybe you wouldn't see everything, you know, like you'd have to have an electronic copy actually. But the place another place I didn't see all the markup is, 'cause I'm used to this word, the initial phase of the public hearing was the old 17, and in the new F, you don't see the word initial struck out. So, and then if there's a new commissioner other than Chris Storr, who Jeff did introduce, and Maria and Tyler are absent tonight, would that mean 10 commissioners? Or is that just 9?
We have 9 commissioners.
Okay. Let me see. Oh, I'm going to get confused. Okay.
There are 2 missing tonight.
There are 2 missing tonight, but you said you had a new commissioner that was appointed at council on Monday. So that commissioner presumably is replacing one of you? One of the 7 others?
Yes, I forgot to announce Bernadine Stake has retired from the commission, and we appreciate her service.
So, also the thing for removal only talks about absence, in that's in the bylaws, and like if you didn't have excused absences, but in I don't know if Danny I should say, it wasn't in a meeting. I just overheard that you were a long way out of town, so that wouldn't be.
If we contact and inform them that we will be away, that's an excused absence.
Pardon me?
Anytime we can't make a meeting, we contact city staff in advance and tell them that we will be away, and that counts as an excused absence.
That the part in I think it's in 1817 in the Urbana Code of Ordinances, that it says only 2 of the commissioners can live in the ETJ.
I live 3 blocks from here.
Oh, so that's not, misoverhearing of me. I'm good, glad I get to straighten that out on officially. Then, wait, okay, this is like an example. I think that the markup, I think, of uninterrupted is actually a really good thing, because it, you can't, the person speaking, if they mess it up, it's all on them, you know, it's like they can't blame the commission for one thing. And if, for that atmosphere of, you know, I'm not complaining tonight so much, I appreciate your answers, but I think that it, in designing the, you know, that public comment rule. But maybe the whole thing is it should be at a Board of Government Information, because all the commissions of the city would be together and have any legal cases plus the state law that's about public comment before them, the actual words, and if there's some efficiency involved, for example, you know, will all of the boards be meeting in either one or two rooms so that you can have a clock on the wall and people can see when their time starts? And, or if there's been talk of cards, you know, you print a whole bunch of cards.
We'd like for you to finish up now soon. We've given you 5 minutes.
But, so that would be that I could say, well, that isn't. I guess I yielded my time. Should I finish that point?
Please finish
yeah.
that point, and then we'd like to wrap it up.
So, there can be confusion that you're, you know, the different little segments that you, where you were speaking at should add up. You know, people could be contentious about it, or okay, I forget. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Staff report? Do we have anyone else? No. Okay. Staff report?
No report tonight.
No report. No study session?
No, sir.
I pronounce this meeting adjourned.